The first thing Ethan noticed about the royal capital wasn't the floating towers or the rivers of blue light flowing between them. It was the birds. Hundreds of metallic birds glided through the crimson sky, carrying tiny packages between shimmering platforms with perfect precision. One of them flew straight toward him, stopped a few centimeters from his nose, scanned his face with a cheerful beep, and projected the words, "Welcome, authorized visitor. Please avoid being eaten." Ethan blinked. "I appreciate the concern." The bird chirped happily before flying away. "Very comforting city." He adjusted the worn tool bag hanging over his shoulder and continued through the enormous spaceport. Around him, aliens from dozens of worlds crossed glowing walkways. Some floated instead of walking. Others communicated through changing colors across their skin. Security drones drifted overhead like silent moons. Ethan, meanwhile, looked exactly like a tired human mechanic who had spent too many years repairing cargo ships held together by optimism and cheap welding. His contract was simple enough: repair several aging transport reactors belonging to the Queen's logistics fleet. Easy work, good pay, no adventures. Experience had taught him that whenever a job sounded that simple, something expensive usually exploded. A towering guard stepped into his path. She looked almost human, except for the elegant long ears extending through silver hair braided behind her head. Her polished armor shimmered with moving energy patterns. Human Ethan Walker? Depends. Am I receiving a reward or a bill? The guard stared without expression. A work assignment. Excellent, then yes. She gestured toward an anti-gravity shuttle. Her Majesty has ordered that all foreign specialists receive royal protection.
Protection. There have been incidents. Climbed aboard.
I don't like the way you paused before saying incidents. The guard remained silent. I was hoping you'd say something reassuring. I cannot. Honesty, I respect that. The shuttle lifted smoothly into the sky, weaving between skyscrapers that stretched into the clouds. Giant transparent bridges connected entire districts, while enormous cargo vessels floated overhead like artificial continents. Far below, Ethan noticed something strange. People weren't looking at the palace. They were looking beyond it, toward distant mountains surrounded by an immense circular energy barrier. Even from kilometers away, something moved inside. Something enormous. The guard noticed his curiosity. "Do not ask." "I wasn't going to." "You were." "I absolutely was." "The answer is classified." "So it's dangerous." "Extremely." "Alive?" "Yes." He sighed dramatically. "I knew it. Every time someone says routine maintenance, there turns out to be a monster." The guard almost smiled. Almost. When they reached the palace, Ethan expected luxury. He wasn't prepared for magnificence. Crystal gardens floated between elegant towers. Waterfalls climbed upward instead of falling. Artificial suns illuminated enormous courtyards where robotic gardeners carefully trimmed glowing trees. Then, the atmosphere changed. Soldiers ran across the balconies. Emergency alarms echoed through the palace. A distant roar rolled across the mountains. The sound wasn't merely loud, it vibrated through the air itself. Windows trembled. The anti-gravity shuttle briefly lost altitude before recovering. Every guard immediately reached for their weapon. "What was that?" Ethan asked. No one answered. Far away, inside the energy barrier, a gigantic shadow rose above the mountains for only a heartbeat before disappearing again. The silence afterwards somehow felt louder. A palace officer hurried toward the landing platform. "It rejected another trainer." The guards exchanged exhausted looks. "How many this month?" one quietly asked. 7. Ethan slowly looked toward the distant mountains again. "I'm suddenly very happy I fix engines." Nobody laughed, which somehow made his joke even funnier to him. He picked up his tool bag and followed the guards inside, completely unaware that before sunset, the legendary creature that had rejected every warrior, scientist, and beastmaster for decades would quietly lower its head beside an ordinary human mechanic as though greeting someone it had been waiting for all its life. Morning arrived beneath 3 pale suns that painted the palace with shifting shades of silver and gold. Ethan had expected to wake to birdsong. Instead, an electronic voice politely informed him that his room's gravity calibration had been updated and suggested he avoid jumping out of bed unless recreational ceiling collisions are desired. "Good morning to you too." Ethan muttered as he carefully placed his feet on the floor. His guest chamber overlooked the royal gardens. Floating flowers drifted lazily through the air, while tiny maintenance drones buzzed between them like mechanical bees. It almost felt peaceful. Almost. A loud horn echoed across the palace. Another, then another. Servants stopped walking. Guards immediately turned toward the eastern windows. Ethan stepped onto the balcony. Far beyond the palace walls, the massive containment barrier shimmered against the mountains. Waves of blue energy rippled across its surface, as though something inside had brushed against it. "You've got one noisy neighbor," he whispered. A palace attendant hurried into the room. "Master Ethan, Her Majesty requests your presence. I haven't even had breakfast. Her Majesty has also arranged breakfast." Now that's diplomacy. Minutes later, Ethan entered an enormous dining hall, whose ceiling displayed a moving map of nearby star systems. At the far end stood Queen Lysera. She was breathtaking. Her appearance was almost entirely human, yet the elegant long ears, extending gracefully through her silver blonde hair, immediately revealed her alien heritage. She wore a dark royal uniform woven with living fibers that shimmered softly whenever she moved. Despite the regal clothing, there was a quiet exhaustion behind her calm blue eyes. She had not slept well. Ethan offered an awkward bow. "I practiced that in the hallway." "It was acceptable," Lysera replied with the faintest smile. "So, 6 out of 10? 7. I'll take it." For the first time that morning, one of the royal guards quietly chuckled. Breakfast was unlike anything Ethan had imagined. Transparent fruit floated gently above crystal plates. Bread changed flavor, depending on which sauce touched it. One steaming cup politely introduced itself before informing Ethan it contained enough caffeine to keep an elephant awake for 4 days. "I'll have half." "You are wise," the cup answered. Lysera watched him with curiosity. "You adapt quickly." "I've repaired cargo ships for 12 years. After fixing a reactor beside a talking fungus, nothing surprises me." "A talking fungus?" "It complained about my screwdriver." The queen laughed before quickly composing herself. Several advisors exchanged surprised glances. Apparently, the queen did not laugh often. Their meal was interrupted when an officer rushed into the hall. "Your Majesty," his voice was tense. "The creature has rejected another feeding attempt." Silence settled across the chamber. Lysera slowly placed her cup down. "Casualties. No fatalities. 3 injured." Ethan looked around. "You all say that like this happens every Tuesday." "It does," one elderly advisor sighed. Before anyone could continue, the palace lights flickered. Every communication crystal glowed bright crimson. An artificial voice echoed through the hall. "Containment Gate 7 has been compromised." Guards instantly sprinted toward the exits. Lysera stood. "Prepare the emergency response." The officer hesitated. "It is already too late." "What do you mean?" "The creature," he swallowed, "walked out." A heavy silence followed. Ethan blinked. "Walked out? No barrier has ever failed." "So, where is it now?" Nobody answered. Then every person in the room slowly turned toward the enormous garden outside. Standing among the floating trees was a gigantic beast, nearly the height of the palace itself. Its midnight black body shimmered with patterns resembling distant galaxies. Silver horns curved backward above intelligent golden eyes. Streams of blue energy flowed beneath its skin like rivers beneath glass. Hundreds of soldiers surrounded it. Thousands of weapons were aimed. The creature ignored every one of them. Instead, it lifted its head. Its nose twitched once, twice. Then it looked directly through the palace window at Ethan. The enormous beast calmly began walking toward the dining hall, while every guard shouted orders. Ethan slowly set down his fork. "I have a very strange feeling." The creature lowered its massive head against the palace wall, closed its eyes, and released a soft, rumbling sound that resembled the contented purr of an impossibly oversized cat. "That it likes me." Nobody in the kingdom had ever seen the legendary creature behave that way. Nobody moved. Hundreds of royal guards held their energy rifles steady, yet every one of them looked less prepared than the enormous creature standing peacefully outside the palace. Its golden eyes remained fixed on Ethan alone, completely ignoring the weapons pointed at its head. The silence stretched so long that Ethan finally cleared his throat. "So, is it considered rude if I wave?" "No!" several guards shouted together. "I'll take that as palace etiquette." Queen Lysera slowly approached the window. Up close, the creature looked even more impossible. Blue streams of energy drifted beneath its dark hide like living constellations. Every breath distorted the air around it, bending light as if gravity itself respected its presence. The queen spoke without taking her eyes off it. His name is Varkuun. His? We discovered that centuries ago. And he has always been this large? He was smaller. How much smaller? Lysera hesitated. When he was born, he fit inside this room. Ethan looked at the creature, whose head alone was nearly the size of the dining hall. That's an ambitious growth chart. No one laughed. Varkuun suddenly lowered himself onto the grass, folded his enormous legs beneath his body, and released another deep rumble. The vibration rolled gently through the palace. Instead of sounding threatening, it almost sounded content. An elderly scientist pushed through the crowd carrying several floating scanners. Your Majesty, permission to conduct a resonance analysis. Granted. The scanners flew toward Varkuun. They barely reached his nose before every device simultaneously shut down and floated harmlessly to the ground. The scientist stared. I calibrated those yesterday. Ethan shrugged. And maybe he's anti-technology. The scientist looked offended. That is scientifically impossible. One of the disabled scanners suddenly rebooted by itself. Its screen displayed a single sentence. Unknown genetic resonance detected. Then it switched itself off forever. The scientist slowly removed his glasses. I dislike today. Meanwhile, Varkuun continued watching Ethan, not blinking, not growling, simply waiting. A young captain stepped beside the queen. Your Majesty, we should eliminate the human. The dining hall instantly became silent. Ethan blinked. That escalated quickly. If the creature wants him, removing him may drive it away. Lysera turned sharply. No, but no. Her calm voice carried enough authority that even the captain lowered his head. Ethan quietly whispered, "Thank you. I have not decided whether trusting you is wise," Lysera replied. Fair. Another alarm echoed through the palace. Not an attack alarm, a civilian evacuation alert. Across the city, thousands of citizens were already moving toward underground shelters. Children peeked nervously through windows at the gigantic creature resting beside the royal gardens. One little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. He's sleeping. He isn't sleeping. He looks sleepy. He can destroy mountains? The little girl tilted her head. He still looks sleepy. Ethan couldn't disagree. Varkuun suddenly sneezed. The blast of compressed air sent flower petals swirling across half the garden and knocked several ceremonial banners sideways. One unfortunate guard lost his helmet. Another landed inside the decorative fountain. Ethan burst into laughter. I'm sorry. He tried to stop. I know this is serious. The soaked guard climbed out of the fountain. But that was impressive. Even Queen Lysera covered a smile. For the first time in many years, the tension surrounding Varkuun weakened, if only for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. The creature slowly stood. Every weapon immediately rose again. Varkuun ignored them. He walked directly toward the palace wall until his enormous head rested beside the open balcony where Ethan stood. Only a few meters separated them. The guards froze. Lysera's breathing slowed. Ethan looked into the creature's enormous golden eye. I've repaired engines bigger than apartments, he murmured softly. But I've never introduced myself to one. Without thinking, he stepped forward. Several soldiers shouted for him to stop. He didn't. His hand slowly reached toward the creature's massive forehead. The instant his fingers touched the warm, smooth surface, the blue patterns beneath Varkuun's skin brightened. Not violently, gently, like stars appearing one by one across a peaceful night sky. The creature closed its eyes, lowered its enormous body. Then, with absolute trust, it curled itself beside the balcony, exactly as a loyal companion might settle beside an old friend it had finally found again. Every scanner in the palace activated at once. Deep beneath the royal palace, ancient machines that had remained silent for thousands of years suddenly awakened. The rumble beneath the palace was so deep that the crystal windows sang with a faint, shimmering note. It did not feel like an earthquake. It felt as though something ancient had stretched after an impossibly long sleep. Every display panel throughout the dining hall flickered. Then, one by one, they lit with symbols no one present recognized, except the oldest royal historian. His face turned pale. Those, he whispered, have not appeared in over 3,000 years. Queen Lysera immediately looked toward him. You can read them? Only fragments. The symbols shifted, reorganizing themselves into a language everyone could understand. Primary bloodline detected. Guardian compatibility confirmed. The entire room froze. Ethan slowly looked behind himself. I assume that's talking about someone else? No one answered. I was really hoping someone would answer. Outside, Varkuun lifted his enormous head, not with excitement, but with quiet satisfaction. His glowing eyes briefly reflected the same symbols floating across every palace screen. The elderly scientist, who had nearly suffered 3 nervous breakdowns that morning, rubbed his forehead. I spent 40 years studying this creature, he sighed. You arrived yesterday. Ethan offered an apologetic smile. I also find this unfair. Another scientist interrupted. We need genetic samples immediately. Ethan blinked. How immediate are we talking? The scientist produced an injection tool, roughly the size of a screwdriver. Oh. Ethan slowly stepped backward. I suddenly remembered I have maintenance. You are standing inside the dining hall. Portable maintenance. Queen Lysera raised a hand. Enough. The room instantly became quiet. No unnecessary procedures until we understand what has happened. Yeah. says reluctantly award their equipment. Ethan whispered, thank you again. I am protecting my guest. I appreciate being classified as a guest instead of laboratory equipment. For the first time, Lysera's composed expression softened into genuine amusement. You possess unusual courage. I possess survival instincts. Most people cannot tell the difference. Before Ethan could answer, Varkuun made another deep sound. This time it was shorter, almost questioning. The creature's enormous nose gently nudged the balcony railing. It bent solid alloy like soft clay. One guard stared. That railing cost more than my house. Ethan carefully walked outside. Easy, big guy. Varkuun immediately stopped moving. You know, Ethan continued, you're probably the first animal I've met that apologizes by accident. The beast lowered his ears slightly. Several guards exchanged confused looks. Did it just look embarrassed? Nobody had an explanation. Ethan glanced at the twisted railing. We'll pretend that never happened. Varkuun released a soft rumble that almost resembled agreement. A tiny maintenance drone flew over to inspect the damage. It scanned the railing, paused, then projected a repair invoice directly into the air. Estimated cost, 482,000 royal credits. Ethan laughed. He's definitely not paying that. The drone rotated toward Varkuun. After scanning the enormous beast, it quietly deleted the invoice. Smart drone. Laughter spread among several nearby soldiers. The fear that had gripped the palace since morning eased just enough for conversations to resume. But beneath everyone's relief, something else was changing. Far below the palace, sealed vaults continued opening one after another. Dust-covered machines awakened. Ancient reactors hummed with renewed life. A forgotten intelligence patiently reconstructed fragmented records. Deep underground, a circular chamber illuminated for the first time in millennia. In its center stood an enormous crystalline pillar surrounded by hundreds of inactive holographic projectors. One projector suddenly activated. A translucent figure appeared, not human, not one of Lysera's people, something far older. Its calm, mechanical voice echoed through the empty chamber. Guardian descendant located. A pause followed, then another message. Initiating ancestral verification. Above ground, Ethan absent-mindedly scratched beneath Varkuun's massive jaw. The legendary beast closed his glowing eyes and leaned into the touch with unmistakable contentment. The movement shifted several tons of muscle. The palace floor trembled again. A nearby captain sighed. I cannot believe our greatest military threat. He watched the creature happily enjoying a scratch behind one enormous horn. Likes belly rubs. Ethan grinned. I was going to try that next. Please don't. I wasn't actually serious. Varkuun suddenly rolled slightly onto one side. The enormous beast looked directly at Ethan, then exposed part of his chest. The captain slowly closed his eyes. He understood the joke. Silence filled the courtyard. Finally, Ethan smiled helplessly. Well, I guess I have to commit now. Ethan stared at the enormous creature lying beside the palace like an oversized house cat waiting for attention. One massive golden eye remained fixed on him with unmistakable expectation. Every soldier in the courtyard stared at Ethan. Every scientist stared at Ethan. Even Queen Lysera folded her arms, watching with careful curiosity. The silence became almost unbearable. Ethan sighed. If this goes badly, I'd like everyone to remember I was peer pressured by several thousand witnesses. No one objected. That's not encouraging. He stepped closer. Varkuun remained perfectly still, his chest rising slowly with each breath. Blue currents shimmered beneath his dark skin, tracing patterns that looked less random the longer Ethan observed them. They resembled ancient constellations. Very carefully, Ethan rested one hand against the creature's chest. Nothing happened. He rubbed gently. For 3 endless seconds, the courtyard held its breath. Then Varkuun released the loudest, deepest purr anyone had ever heard. The sound rolled across the capital like distant thunder. Windows vibrated. Floating fountains produced ripples. Several decorative drones lost balance and drifted sideways. One palace gardener sighed dramatically. "There go my flowers again." The enormous beast stretched happily, accidentally lifting one front paw into the air. The motion generated enough wind to scatter hats, cloaks, and one unfortunate officer's stack of official documents. Thousands of pages flew across the gardens. The officer watched them disappear into the sky. Those were alphabetized. Ethan couldn't help laughing. "I'm really sorry." "So am I." Even Queen Lysera smiled openly this time. For years, the palace had known only fear whenever Varkuun moved. Today, laughter echoed instead. The peaceful moment ended when every crystal screen surrounding the courtyard illuminated simultaneously. Unlike before, the symbols did not remain unreadable. A 3-dimensional star map appeared above the palace. Countless glowing systems rotated slowly. One after another, dozens of stars dimmed. Only a handful continued shining brightly. A calm synthetic voice filled the air. "Searching, Guardian bloodline verification. Genetic archive comparison in progress." The elderly historian whispered almost reverently. "The palace core. I believed it had died centuries ago." The projection shifted. A glowing line stretched from an ancient star system to Earth, then another, then dozens more. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. "I suddenly have the uncomfortable feeling this is about me." The palace core answered him. "Correct." He looked upward. "Well, that's unsettling." Queen Lysera stepped beside him. "You have never seen these records before?" "I grew up fixing tractors." She blinked. "What is a tractor?" "It's considerably less impressive than whatever this is." The artificial intelligence continued. "Primary genetic markers correspond with extinct civilization designation." Voice in Turi. Paused and then resumed. "Star Shepherd." Gasps echoed throughout the courtyard. Several historians nearly dropped their recording tablets. One scientist whispered, "Impossible." Another quietly answered, "Apparently not." Ethan frowned. "I've never heard of star shepherds." "No living civilization has," Lysera said softly. "They vanished before our oldest recorded history." The projection expanded again. This time it displayed gigantic creatures nearly identical to Varkuun. Not one, hundreds. They walked beside people wearing simple clothing instead of armor. No chains, no weapons. Children climbed onto the creatures' backs while adults harvested glowing forests. The legendary beasts were not soldiers. They were companions. The revelation stunned everyone. The palace core spoke again. "Correction accepted. Historical records inaccurate. Guardian beasts were never domesticated. They chose." Silence followed. Ethan slowly looked at Varkuun, who had already closed his eyes again while enjoying another scratch beneath one horn. "So," he smiled, "you picked me?" The enormous beast gently nudged Ethan with his nose. The push was so careful that it barely moved him despite the creature's immense strength. Queen Lysera watched the exchange thoughtfully. "There is no command, no domination, no fear." Ethan nodded. "I think—" He rested his hand against Varkuun's forehead. He just wanted someone to trust him. Far beneath the palace, hidden beyond layers of forgotten machinery, another sealed chamber unlocked with a deafening metallic echo. Unlike the previous vaults, this one contained weapons. Rows upon rows of ancient star-forged armor awakened. In the darkness, countless dormant blue lights slowly opened like watchful eyes. Somewhere beyond the stars, an unknown receiver detected the activation signal. A transmission was immediately sent across the galaxy. The message contained only 4 words. "The Guardian has returned." The message reached the edge of the galaxy in less than a second. No one in the palace knew it had been transmitted. No one except the palace core. Deep beneath the royal capital, ancient processors hummed with renewed purpose. Dust that had rested undisturbed for thousands of years drifted from forgotten ceilings as sealed corridors slowly illuminated one after another. Hidden defense satellites, believed to be nothing more than abandoned moons, quietly adjusted their orbits. Above, life continued as though nothing had changed. Ethan was sitting on Varkuun's enormous foreleg. "I have to admit," he said, patting the creature's dark hide, "you're much more comfortable than the chairs inside." Varkuun answered with a soft rumble. A nearby soldier shook his head. "Our legendary guardian has become furniture." Another replied, "Luxury furniture." Even Queen Lysera allowed herself a quiet laugh. She approached Ethan, her silver hair moving gently in the evening breeze. The graceful long ears rising through it gave her an almost ethereal appearance beneath the light of the three moons. "You remain surprisingly calm. I repair reactors." She looked puzzled. "And if you panic around unstable reactors, they explode." She considered that. "A useful philosophy. I found it applies to large animals too." As if agreeing, Varkuun carefully lowered his head until it rested beside Ethan's shoulder. The giant beast looked perfectly content. Suddenly, every communication tower in the capital emitted a sharp pulse. One, then another. A fleet officer ran into the courtyard. "Your Majesty," Lysera turned immediately. "Report. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet emerging from fold space." The courtyard became silent. "How many ships?" "We cannot count them." The officer swallowed. They are still arriving." Above the city, the peaceful sky transformed into a massive tactical display. Brilliant points of light appeared one after another. 10, 30, 100. The numbers continued climbing. Citizens across the capital watched from streets and balconies as the stars themselves seemed to multiply. An elderly advisor whispered, "No neighboring empire possesses a fleet that size." Another officer hurried over. "No identification codes, no diplomatic channels, no communications. Only silence." Ethan stared upward. "I don't suppose they're delivering packages." "No," Lysera answered quietly. "They are coming with purpose." Before panic could spread, the palace core interrupted every transmission. Its calm mechanical voice echoed across the kingdom. "Attention! Unknown fleet identified." The tactical display shifted. Ancient symbols appeared beside the approaching armada. Then a single warning flashed across every screen. "Descendant hunters." Nobody understood the meaning. Nobody except the holographic figure hidden beneath the palace. It continued speaking. "They seek surviving members of the Star Shepherd bloodline. They will not negotiate. They will not retreat. They will eliminate." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I'm beginning to miss fixing cargo engines." One nervous guard muttered, "I miss when our biggest problem was Varkuun." The giant creature slowly stood. His relaxed expression vanished. Blue rivers of light spread beneath his skin. The constellations covering his body began rotating like living galaxies. For the first time since Ethan had met him, Varkuun looked truly alert, not frightened, ready. The ground trembled beneath his enormous weight. Then something extraordinary happened. Far beyond the mountains, answering roars echoed across the horizon. One, then another, then dozens. Everyone turned toward the distant wilderness. Massive shapes emerged from forests, deserts, frozen valleys, and crystal cliffs. Creatures unlike any living animals. Some possessed wings spanning entire valleys. Others moved on 6 armored legs. One glided silently above the clouds like a living island. Every one of them carried the same glowing blue patterns beneath their skin. The legendary beasts were not extinct. They had been waiting. Varkuun released a thunderous call toward the heavens. The answering cries shook the continent. Queen Lysera looked at Ethan in astonishment. "They're responding to him." Ethan slowly shook his head. "I don't think." He watched the gathering giants. "They're responding to Varkuun." He looked down at the ancient symbols still glowing faintly across his own hands, unnoticed until now. "I think," the palace core finished the sentence. "They are responding to the guardian." Silence fell over the kingdom. Even Ethan looked at his hands with disbelief. "I really should have read my family history more carefully." Despite the fear gripping the palace, several exhausted soldiers couldn't help laughing because somehow only Ethan could discover he had awakened an army of legendary creatures and complained that it was probably a genealogy problem. The unknown fleet reached the outer edge of the royal system just as the first rays of dawn touched the palace towers. Hundreds of dark warships emerged from fold space in perfect formation, blotting out entire sections of the stars. Their hulls carried no insignias, only pale symbols that matched the warning displayed by the palace core. No communication arrived, no demands, only silence. Queen Lysera stood on the highest balcony beside Ethan. Her silver hair swayed in the cool morning wind, and her graceful long ears caught the golden light. Below them, the citizens watched with anxious determination instead of panic. They had seen something impossible over the past few days. They had seen fear transformed into trust. The palace core spoke once more. Recommendation: prepare for extinction. Ethan scratched his chin. I've heard more encouraging advice from broken coffee machines. Several nearby officers laughed despite themselves. Then Varkuun stepped forward. His enormous roar echoed across the planet. One by one, the legendary beasts answered. The winged giants descended from the clouds. Massive guardians emerged from forests, oceans, and mountain ranges. They did not gather like an army preparing for conquest. They gathered like an ancient family answering the call of someone they had not seen for thousands of years. The hostile fleet hesitated. For the first time, its formation faltered. The lead warship transmitted a message. Deliver the guardian descendant. Ethan looked around. They're talking about me again, aren't they? They are, Lysera replied. You know, I preferred being the anonymous mechanic. Without another word, Ethan stepped to the front of the balcony. He looked at the thousands of people behind him, then at the countless legendary beasts waiting quietly across the horizon. Finally, he shook his head. I'm not ordering anyone to fight. The palace core paused. Clarify. They aren't weapons. He gently rested a hand against Varkuun's massive face. They're living beings. Varkuun closed his eyes for a brief moment. Every other guardian did the same. The unknown fleet detected the synchronized response. Its tactical computers immediately recalculated the odds. Probability of victory, less than 1%. Several hostile ships turned away, then more followed. Within minutes, the enormous armada retreated into fold space without firing a single shot. The battle ended before it began, not because someone had demonstrated greater firepower, because they had demonstrated unity the attackers could neither predict nor control. A cheer swept across the capital. Children ran through the streets laughing. Musicians filled the floating plazas. The palace no longer felt like a fortress. It finally felt like a home. Weeks later, the forgotten archives had been completely restored. The truth became known throughout the galaxy. The Star Shepherds had never ruled through strength. They had protected life through compassion, and the guardian beasts had always chosen kindness over authority. Queen Lysera offered Ethan a title, an estate, and a permanent seat beside the throne. He smiled awkwardly. I actually have one request. What is it? She asked. I'd like a workshop. A workshop? My tools are still in a storage locker. Lysera laughed so hard that even the royal advisors smiled. It shall be the finest workshop in the kingdom. Perfect. And the palace suite? I suppose I can tolerate it. Life gradually settled into a comfortable rhythm. Engineers frequently found Varkuun sleeping outside Ethan's workshop, making deliveries slightly inconvenient. One courier sighed while staring at the enormous guardian blocking the entrance. Could someone ask him to move? Varkuun opened one eye. The courier immediately changed his mind. I'll come back tomorrow. Even the queen couldn't hide her laughter. Ethan often looked toward the stars, remembering how he had arrived believing he was nothing more than an ordinary mechanic. He left that life behind without losing what mattered most. He had discovered that true strength was never hidden in ancient bloodlines, forgotten machines, or legendary creatures. It lived in the simple decision to meet fear with compassion. Beside him, Varkuun gently rested his enormous head against his shoulder. Queen Lysera quietly took Ethan's hand. Above them, the three suns rose together, illuminating a kingdom where trust had replaced fear, where forgotten history had become hope, and where an ordinary human had reminded an entire galaxy that the greatest guardians were never those who commanded power, but those who earned it.